Welcome to the debate. Imagine for a moment that you're exploring, I don't know, an ancient abandoned city, and you find a map. And this map is drawn in a language you don't entirely understand, utilizing a geometry that shouldn't theoretically exist in our everyday physical world.
Right, it's completely alien.
Exactly. Yet, when you hold this map up to the horizon, it perfectly aligns with every single street, every crumbling building, and, the exact arc of the stars overhead. It tells you precisely how the city was built without using any of the tools a normal architect would use.
It's an eerie feeling, for sure. But, when you look closely at that map, you have to ask a fundamental question about how it was actually made. Did the cartographer measure the physical foundations, like the bricks, the mortar, the actual terrain, or did they just draw an incredibly intricate, mathematically beautiful pattern and, get suspiciously lucky with how it fits the landscape?
And that brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are diving into a pair of theoretical papers that propose a really fascinating new Lorentzian cosmological model. Now, I want to acknowledge up front that the source material is, frankly, heavily mathematical.
Yeah, that is an understatement.
It really is. So while we're both deeply familiar with the math, we are going to try our best to break this down for the listeners. Basically, the material explores a four-dimensional space-time embedded in this highly complex algebraic structure. It extends standard complex numbers into something called split quaternions.
Which sounds intimidating, but it's really just a specialized mathematical framework.
Right. And this purely mathematical framework generates a squared scaling factor, which is essentially a metric describing the rate at which our universe expands. Crucially, this geometric model produces an expansion curve that, it mimics our standard physical model of the universe perfectly. But it does it without relying on the physical presence of matter, radiation, or dark energy.
And the conflict here lies entirely in the physical validity of that math. Do the mathematical assumptions in this model, specifically the introduction of an arbitrary unphysical velocity profile, do they provide a valid, revolutionary bridge to serve Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology?
Or, as you might argue, are they just mathematical parlor tricks?
Exactly. Are they parlor tricks that completely break down when subjected to the actual physical causal realities of standard cosmology?
Well, I will argue that the model's geometric derivations, along with its bold assumptions, brilliantly match standard cosmology and provide a truly valid, elegant mathematical argument for traversing the boundary between eons in a cyclic universe.
And I will argue that the mathematical limits of this approach are severely strained. I mean, it relies on an arbitrary ansatz, which is just a mathematical guess, to force a connection to standard cosmology, ultimately breaking the causal structure of the universe simply to make the algebra work.
Okay, let me lay out the elegance of what this author has achieved, because it completely upends how we typically model the universe. Standard cosmology, specifically the lambda CDM model, is profoundly physical.
Lots of messy physical stuff.
Right, messy physical stuff. It describes the expansion of the universe by laboriously calculating the gravitational drag of matter, the outward pressure of radiation, and of course the mysterious accelerating push of dark energy. But this paper, it just ignores all that.
Conveniently.
Well, elegantly, I'd say. Instead, it builds a non-commutative ring with 8 components. Now, to simplify this for our listeners, think about normal math, where 3 times 4 is the same as 4 times 3. In a non-commutative ring, the order of operations actually matters. It's directional.
Like turning right, then walking forward, puts you in a completely different spot than walking forward, then turning right.
That is a perfect analogy, yeah. By using this directional split quaternion algebra, the author essentially weaves the dimensions of space and time together. And to make the model dynamic, they introduce an ultra-speed formula, modeled as a slow exponential curve. V of t equals 1 minus e to the negative t.
Which is where the problems start, in my opinion.
Hold on, let me finish the thought. When you feed that simple curve into the algebraic structure, the geometry naturally outputs an expansion curve that flawlessly replicates the standard model's expansion at late times. It provides a purely geometric foundation for the universe, and it mathematically maps the boundary conditions needed to support Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology.
Look, the mathematical feat is genuinely remarkable. I'm not denying that. Creating a tensor product that preserves orthogonality in this 8-dimensional space is, well, it's brilliant.
Because it keeps the geometry coherent.
Right. In plain terms for the audience, preserving orthogonality means that even when you stretch and twist this mathematical space, right angles stay right angles. But the physical application of this algebra falls apart under scrutiny.
How so?
The NLM project outline letter included in the material points out the glaring flaw. The author pulls a magical exponential ansatz for velocity entirely out of a hat. Standard cosmology relies on actual physical contents driving an actual physical expansion.
But mathematical models often abstract those details.
Yes, but by artificially forcing this v of t parameter into the metric, and then requiring the very signature of spacetime to invert at a negative time, specifically t equals negative natural log of 2, the model stretches mathematics far beyond physical reality. I mean, it completely shatters the causal structure of the universe just to make an algebraic equation balance.
Let's address that accusation of, pulling a parameter out of a hat. Because the entire history of physics is built on magical mathematical guesses that eventually revealed profound physical truths.
I think I know where you're going with this.
The NLM letter itself brings up Max Planck. Planck introduced the concept of the quantum, these discrete, indivisible packets of energy, as a pure mathematical trick to fix broken equations related to black-body radiation.
But that was fixing a specific observable problem.
True, but he didn't have physical proof for quanta at the time. It was an ansatz, a guess, but that mathematical trick became the undeniable foundation of quantum mechanics. I look at this model like designing a mathematically perfect, tailored suit and discovering it fits the universe's measurements flawlessly without you ever putting a tape measure to the fabric.
Wait. You're calling it a perfect fit, but isn't that just because we explicitly tailored the fabric after looking at the measurements?
I wouldn't say it was reverse engineered quite like that.
Come on, it definitely is. The standard model gives us an expansion curve driven by a physical tug-of-war. Early in the universe, the gravity of dense matter slows the expansion down. Later on, dark energy takes over and accelerates it.
Right, resulting in that specific hyperbolic sine function shape.
Exactly, proportional to the hyperbolic sine of 3t over 4 to the 2/3 power. But the v of t parameter in this paper isn't a natural geometric consequence. The author explicitly introduces a low exponential profile, 1 minus e to the negative t, purely because their algebraic transformation requires a velocity bounded between 0 and 1.
Yes, it needs to fit the mathematical bounds of the algebra. But why that specific exponential function? Because at time 0, e to the 0 is 1, so the velocity is exactly 0. As time approaches infinity, the exponential term shrinks to 0 and velocity smoothly hits 1. They knew exactly what the lambda CDM curve looked like, and they picked the one specific exponential function that forces their 8-dimensional algebraic grid to spit out the matching answer. It is textbook reverse engineering. You take the answer you want, and you invent a completely unphysical parameter to guarantee it.
You make it sound like picking an exponential curve automatically generates that super complex hyperbolic sine shape. It absolutely does not. The brilliance lies in how that simple exponential input interacts with the complex machinery of the split quaternions.
It's still just feeding the machine the exact input it needs to fake the output. But the geometry dictates that the squared scaling factor equals the velocity, v of t, divided by 1 minus v squared of t. It's the inherent rules of the algebra, the way those non-commutative spatial and temporal components interact, that transforms a basic 0 to 1 velocity curve into this organic match for a complex cosmological expansion. It is a stunning interface between simple input and profound geometric output.
Well, if we're going to talk about profound outputs, we have to look at what happens when we push this mathematical machinery to its absolute limits. What happens to this algebraic grid when we run the clock backward?
This is exactly where the model's true power reveals itself, particularly its connection to Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology, or CCC.
Which is a highly controversial theory on its own.
Controversial but brilliant. If we assume Penrose is right, the infinitely expanded, cold, empty heat death of our current universe is mathematically identical to the hypercompressed, infinitely dense Big Bang of the next universe.
For that to work, the boundary between these two aeons must be conformal.
Meaning, for the listeners, the angles of the geometry are preserved, but the absolute scale of the space doesn't matter.
Precisely. A conformal mapping is, it's like a shape-preserving mirror image.
Now look at the extremes of this model. At infinite future time, as t goes to positive infinity, the metric flattens out into Minkowski space.
The standard stage for special relativity, 1 dimension of time, 3 of space.
Exactly, which physicists denote with a signature of -1 + 1 + 1 + 1. But here is the magic. If you run the equations backward into negative time, you hit a specific mathematical singularity at t equals negative natural log of 2. At that exact instant, the metric completely flips.
And things get very weird physically.
Just wait. The signature becomes +1, -1, -1, -1. Asymptotically, the configuration at this finite negative time is exactly conformal to the configuration at infinite positive time. Because these two states are conformal metric-wise, this geometric model provides the exact mathematical barrier crossing that Penrose requires. It proves mathematically that the boundary between eons can be traversed.
I think you are severely glossing over the physical chaos that happens in order to reach that boundary. Let's trace the math backward, step by step. As we approach t equals 0 from the future, the universe is shrinking.
Right, going back in time.
When we hit exactly t equals 0, our velocity parameter drops exactly to 0. And because the metric fundamentally relies on v of t, the mathematical distance between all points in the universe becomes a null distance.
Which sounds exactly like a Big Bang singularity, everything compressed into a localized point.
Not exactly, though. Normally, a physical distance of 0 means two things are occupying the exact same physical spot. But in this specific spacetime geometry, a null distance means a particle of light could travel between 2 points without experiencing any time at all.
Which is fascinating.
It's mathematically neat, but physically, the universe hasn't just shrunk to a point. The space-time fabric itself has completely collapsed the separation between events.
Which is the exact state you need to wipe the slate clean of mass and scale to start a new eon. It fits the CCC requirement perfectly.
But the clock doesn't stop at 0. The math keeps running into negative time. Before t equals 0, the squared scaling factor actually becomes negative. What does a negative squared scaling factor imply physically?
It implies imaginary spatial distances.
Exactly. It means our measuring sticks are no longer real numbers. And then we hit that singular moment you mentioned, t equals negative natural log of 2. Let's do the math on why that specific number breaks the universe. The parameter is v of t equals 1 minus e to the negative t.
So if we plug in negative natural log of 2,
The exponentials cancel out, leaving v equal to 1 minus 2. Velocity becomes negative 1.
right, and the scaling factor formula divides by 1 minus v squared.
Exactly. If v is negative 1, v squared is positive 1. The denominator becomes 1 minus 1, which is 0. The scaling factor hits a mathematical singularity because it is dividing by 0.
It's a boundary condition.
In any math class, dividing by 0 breaks the equation. Here, it breaks the universe. It forces that signature flip you described. Space literally becomes time-like, and time becomes space-like. In standard cosmology, causation, the ironclad rule that a cause must precede an effect, is the bedrock of reality. In this model, causality is just a mathematical toggling switch, flipped by a 0 denominator.
But traversing eons should require extreme, non-standard causal inversions at the boundaries. If we are moving from the dying, frozen heat death of one universe into the violently energetic birth of the next, why on earth should we expect the comfortable, forward-marching rules of everyday causality to hold perfectly steady?
Because physics still has to mean something physical.
Look at the visualizations in the source text, specifically Figure 1. It plots this beautifully. The squared scaling function is positive at negative times, goes through this singular moment that forcibly inverts the causal structure, and then successfully recovers as it crosses back into positive time. The breakdown of causality isn't a glitch in the software. It is the necessary mechanical engine for transition.
A mechanism still needs physical grounding. The paper bridges the time before the singularity and the time after using an algebraic function. H of u equals u minus 1 over 2u minus 1.
Which is its own inverse, a perfect algebraic symmetry.
Algebraically, yeah, it's a neat trick. Plug the output back into the equation and you get your starting number. It guarantees perfect mathematical symmetry across the boundary. But this exposes the profound difference between pure algebra and physical cosmology.
I disagree. Symmetry is one of the deepest guiding principles in all of physics. Time symmetry gives us conservation of energy, right? Spatial symmetry gives us conservation of momentum.
Yes, symmetry in physics represents physical truths and conservation laws. Here, the symmetry is imposed purely to satisfy the internal rules of the split Quaternion ring. Standard cosmology tells a physical story of physical evolution, where gravity pulls and pressure pushes.
But what if gravity and pressure are secondary?
This model treats the universe as a rigid, abstract geometric grid where time and space arbitrarily swap identities just to make an equation balance perfectly on both sides. It is confusing the map for the territory. Just because you can draw a solid line on a map that goes straight through a brick wall doesn't mean you can physically walk through it.
In theoretical physics, the map often reveals the territory. Think about the extension of the complex plane itself. There was a time when the square root of -1, imaginary numbers, was considered an impossibility, a pure mathematical fiction.
That is a fair point historically.
Right? Yet creating a geometric space where these imaginary components exist unlocked our entire modern understanding of electromagnetism and quantum wave functions. The author creates a space where components square to +1 but behave like imaginary numbers, and it unlocks this Lorentzian transformation. The fact that manipulating pure algebra results in a metric that naturally yields an expanding universe conformal to standard cosmology is staggering.
It's interesting, but staggering might be a stretch.
It implies that the physical forces we measure, gravity, radiation pressure, might just be localized symptoms of a deeper underlying geometric reality.
Well, if we assume the underlying geometry dictates everything, we strip away the need for physical mechanisms entirely. The author states that this homogeneous universe has a well-defined cosmological density and pressure, yet they calculate this without invoking any knowledge of the actual matter content.
Because the geometry handles it.
No, it's a universe driven by a phantom parameter. The NLM letter was completely justified in expressing caution. While they applaud the mathematical feat of building this 8-component algebra, they zero in on the danger of that master parameter, V. You can mathematically prove almost anything if you are allowed to invent a master parameter and define its behavior specifically to match the data you already have.
Well, let's draw our final thoughts together here. For me, despite your concerns about the reliance on the exponential ansatz, this model stands as a profound geometric achievement. By taking the bold step to extend the complex plane into split quaternions, the author discovers a natural scaling factor hidden within the algebra itself.
Hidden or placed there intentionally?
I believe it's organic. This geometric structure organically mirrors the physical expansion of our universe without needing the messy physical inputs of dark energy or dark matter. More importantly, it provides the precise mathematical scaffolding, the conformal boundary conditions, and the necessary causal inversions needed to make Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology a mathematical reality. It rigorously maps the bridge between eons.
And for me, while the 8-component of the algebraic structure is a genuinely impressive exercise in geometric algebra, its cosmological validity is deeply limited, relying on an arbitrary velocity curve specifically reverse-engineered to mimic known data and requiring physical causation to completely shatter by dividing by 0 at negative natural log of 2. Well, it highlights the danger of confusing beautiful math with physical cosmology.
So you think it's just aesthetics over physics?
Mostly, yes. The universe is not merely an abstract algebraic ring. It is driven by physical causation. To claim this model validates cyclic cosmology is to prioritize algebraic symmetry over the physical reality of the universe.
Which brings us to a fascinating philosophical point of convergence. Whether this is a breakthrough or a parlor trick, it raises a question that has haunted physics for a century. Is the physical expansion of our universe, the physical tug of matter and the push of dark energy, is that the ultimate reality? Or are these physical forces merely the inevitable, inescapable shadow cast by a higher dimensional geometric structure?
It's a great question. Translating complex, multi-vector algebra into physical reality is an ongoing frontier. And for those listening who want to delve into the actual tensor transformations and algebraic proofs, we highly recommend returning to the source text. There's a lot of math we couldn't even touch on today.
Absolutely. Ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, when we find a map that perfectly aligns with the stars, do we trust the elegant geometry of the cartographer, or do we demand to see their physical measurements? We'll leave that for you to decide.